Welcome to the UIC Cube Gallery, creating a union of identity through context. UIC Cube's purpose is to reconcile your perception of other with that of each of a selection of artists by building your experience upon contextual clues from the ways in which the artists depict themselves in their art. Because the very nature of the other is to define by exclusion societal values, resolving these two perceptions will enhance your ability to grasp each artist's sense of his or her native environment and how he or she relates to it. UIC is specially designed to create an environment that promotes mediation of this perceptual comprehension while maintaining a foothold in your own familiar environment, and so bring about a conjunction of your sense of self and each artist's sense of self, a union of identity. As you move through the viewing spaces, your access to your native environment will be regulated by UIC's physical design. Each level of the gallery corresponds to a different period in which the exhibited work was created. UIC's layout correlates vertical and chronological movement, and so as you ascend through the levels from ancient Greek to contemporary art, you will draw incrementally nearer to an artistic setting that is minimally distinguishable from your own. To avoid a disorienting juxtaposition of artistic setting to your native setting, visual access to your familiar environment is limited at lower levels. However, these constraints are relaxed by degrees as you ascend, and are eventually all but entirely removed. UIC's design is also modular and has a very low carbon footprint. In this way, UIC can bring art into virtually any community, be it urban, rural, or tropical, wealthy or underprivileged, and so preserve the nativeness of the surrounding. That is, the surrounding environment you will access is your own and need not be that of a region to which you have traveled a great distance. One final note before you begin your tour of the facility. No original artifacts are maintained at the gallery. Rather, all exhibits contain accurate, though rescaled copies of the originals, certified by the World Art Council. The reasons for this are twofold. First, using WAC certified copies permits rescaling to massive sizes, thus enhancing your ability to be transcended into their depicted realities. And second, acquiring WAC certified copies is significantly less expensive than maintaining original works, and so permits UIC Cube to adopt a no-fee policy. UIC was founded on the principle that you are the most critical element in creating a union of identity through context, and so making art freely available to you in your own native environment is one of UIC's chief aims. Before you begin your tour, UIC recommends you cleanse your perceptual palette. Please take a moment and observe your surroundings. Note the construction materials, the space, what you hear and smell. Note what is familiar and consider what empirical connections you can make to spaces with which you are familiar. When you have done this, please proceed up the stairs to the second level. Once again, welcome to the UIC Cube Gallery. Enjoy your experience.
Phidias was an Athenian sculptor accredited with the creative design of the Parthenon and his mastery of its religious images and his supervision of its overall decor. While little is known of Phidias' personal life, it is said that he alone had seen the exact image of the gods and that he revealed it to man. During the height of his artistic career, Phidias designed 3 monuments in honor of the goddess Athena under Pericles' rule and instruction, starting with the bronze, much larger-than-life Athena Promachos, placed in the Acropolis in 456 BC. Alas, when much is given, much is expected. Phidias experienced his share of political controversy in his role as the chief sculptor of his society, and he was tried in court by the enemies of Pericles on multiple occurrences, for theft and impiety. Records suggest that Phidias inserted a likeness of himself in the frieze Battle of the Amazons at the Parthenon in Athens. This is the first account of a self-portrait in history, an act perceived as hubristic and brought upon him envy and demise. He was proven guilty for this crime and eventually exiled through his death. Phidias' experience as the other was unique in that he fell rapidly from his high horse of prestige and stripped of all rights and glory for the very skill in which he was initially and consistently praised. Anton Pilgrim was a sculptor and master architect in the Gothic style, a late medieval Austrian trained in Vienna, who built his first church in Heilbronn in 1481 at around only 21 years old, and later created many architectural works in Swabia, Germany. In 1582, he became a builder of the St. Stephen's Cathedral in Vienna, where he concentrated on smaller forms and details such as the pulpit and the relief structures. There is little known about Pilgrim's personal life. However, much can be inferred from how he portrays himself in his sculpture. He had what would have been at the time considered an overdeveloped sense of individuality, which probably accounts for his two self-portraits in St. Stephen's Cathedral. Note that he uses a kind of symbolism to communicate who he is to the viewer, in that he portrays himself holding the tools of his trade, the square and the compass, which are also Freemason symbols. Both serve as architect's tools used in Masonic ritual, the square to square actions, and the compass to circumscribe and remain within the boundaries of mankind. The tools are now understood to represent judgment and discernment, and Pilgrim's use of both together may strongly imply that he deems himself as holding a superior knowledge of life's truth than what the common man of his time. As his figures reflect such a high level of individuality outside of the typical medieval architectural perspective, can you speculate as to whether he saw himself in the context of mainstream values or not? While it is obvious he was not rooted deeply within them, was he mildly detached or rather far removed from the artistic and structural standards of his society? Hieronymus Bosch was a Netherlands painter famous for his use of fantastic imagery in his work. The majority of his paintings deal with illustrating moral and religious lessons with a variety of small narratives. The world in his painting is a horrible, ugly place with sin and violence that needs the judgment of God, and the characters in his paintings are almost always foolish and wicked sinners. Historians confirm that upon his gain of wealth and status as an admired painter, he eventually received membership into the humanitarian organization of his hometown, Brotherhood of Our Lady, a society whose members were obliged to provide support for each other in times of hardship or need through acts of charity and kindness. Therefore, one can assume that Bosch lived with an understanding of his responsibilities of the terms of his faith, yet, as consistently depicted in his works, he maintained an acute distaste of the inescapable sin of being human. Bosch inserted himself into several of his undated paintings and, true to his beliefs, his image was depicted as that of a sinner amongst sinners, unworthy of God's saving grace. In Christ Crowned with Thorns, Bosch depicts himself as one of 5 sinners surrounding and fixated upon Jesus, who is centered among them in a white robe wearing a crown of thorns. Jesus is the only figure looking toward the viewer. The characters amongst him are not self-aware or compassionate enough to see what they have become. In this context, we can consider Bosch's view of his society in a godless state, that which he is irrevocably a part of, yet still so distant from, as he is able to see the sinner in himself when others cannot see it within themselves.
Here we can see paintings by Artemisia Gentileschi. She was part of the Baroque movement in the 1600s. She defied the notion that females cannot participate in the art scene and was considered the other due to her willingness to stand out as a female painter during her time. The art she produced had a coherent theme of strong women, which is particularly evident in her painting of Judith beheading Holofernes. In this, she portrays Judith as a powerful heroine who dominates the scene of struggle. The contrast of light and dark generates a strong dramatic effect, increasing tension and concentration. Also, a highly realistic description of blood, contrasting the white sheet, highlights fear and cruelty of the scene. One can clearly see that Judith is aware of her mission, with her sleeves rolled up and with a solemn, determined expression. Without any hesitation, she carries out her quest in full strength. The powerful Judith is used as a symbol of her own desire to retaliate against the rape she endured earlier in her life. Through art, she articulated her agitated state of mind and expressed herself in a way that most women were afraid of doing due to the possible disapproval from society. By painting a picture of the female as in control, she established the strength of the female gender that was unseen in previous art and confirmed her otherness. Here we can see paintings by Caravaggio. He was at the frontier of Baroque painting. He established his unique style with bold structures and strong contrasts that created dramatic emotions. A common theme in his paintings is the idea of contradiction. Examples of this is the use of contradicting themes like strengths and weaknesses, masculinity and femininity, ordinary and godly in his paintings. This might be due to the contradiction between his personality and what was considered the norm in the society at that day. By this, I'm referring to the strong evidence pointing towards Caravaggio as a homosexual, which was highly condemned in society at the time. The contradiction between his feelings and the expectations of society was one of the foundations of his art. Instead of drawing typical self-portraits of other artists, standing in front of an easel or staring at the viewer with a straight posture, Caravaggio often appears in his painting, dressing himself up as a character in myth and history. The contradictions in his art is especially evident in the painting Young Sick Bacchus, where the shape of the muscles are very masculine, but the facial expression and postures is similar to that of a woman. Hiding the actual form and outfit of himself, he describes feelings and situations through other narratives that can be reflections of actual situations. The way he looked at himself and the complexity within him prompt this idea of otherness that was Caravaggio.
Jean-Auguste Dominique Ingres was a neoclassical artist known especially for his natural and lifelike portraits. He painted two self-portraits, one produced when he was 24 and the other at 78. Ingres exhibited his first self-portrait, entitled Self-Portrait at Age 24, at the famed Salon. In it, an empty canvas occupies half of the painting as he appears to erase the other half with the white cloth. He expected to receive awards and recognition as a great artist for this work. However, the painting was subjected to severe criticism and determined to be an unfit subject for the Salon competition, as critics preferred portraits of the elite and those of history to the self-portrait of the artist. The harsh criticism greatly hurt Ingres' pride and broke his self-confidence because the Salon competition was extremely important for artists of his period to succeed in their field. Ingres could not easily overcome this bitter experience. Although he was praised for his outstanding ability to draw portraits, he withheld presenting himself through self-portraits until he was satisfied with his success as a career painter. He finally revised Self-Portrait at age 24 in 1850 when he was 70 years old. In this new version, a young, aspiring painter with passion and self-confidence stands in front of a canvas, his eyes steadily gazes at the viewer, seeming to speak of his determination to be a great young artist at his prime. Ingress's update to his self-portrait after 46 years demonstrates his lifelong quest to reach self-awareness and self-esteem after a traumatizing othering experience.
Here we can see paintings by Marc Chagall, who was a Russian-French artist and was viewed as the quintessential Jew of the 20th century, said by art critic Robert Hughes. He was a major figure in the Cubist movements, and although he experimented with several artistic styles, he remained above all else a Jewish artist, which was not always the easiest of artistic identities. The sustained widespread exclusion of Jews from mainstream society since antiquity gave rise to two but mutually exclusive paths for Jewish artists when Chagall entered the scene. One, denying their Jewish heritage, or two, completely embrace and cherish their Jewish roots. Chagall chose the latter part. His profound religious engagement sparked a desire to portray the strength embodied by the Jewish population, despite their perpetual existence as the other. He did not choose his position as the other. This choice was made for him by spotlighting his Jewishness in his work and celebrating the otherwise unrecognized strength of the Jewish people. In Self-Portrait with Seven Fingers, Chagall conspicuously displays his Jewish heritage by referring to the Yiddish folk expression mit alle sieben Finger, literally meaning with all seven fingers, translating into working as fast and hard as possible. And while the expression can be applied literally in the context of him painting, the meaning can be interpreted more universally as Chagall extolling the Jews as cultural innovators and significant contributors to society as a whole, both artistically and professionally through their hard work. By this interpretation, we see Chagall as a personification of Jewish identity, wearing his otherness like a badge of nobility. Through simple gestures and tranquil figures, Chagall was able to portray a monumental sense of dignity embodied by the Jewish community. The role as an outsider came naturally to Chagall, and he produced a new level of synthesis of the Jewish community. We can see paintings done by Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec. He was born in France and is considered one of the most influential artists of the post-impressionism era. He himself had a normally proportioned upper body, but painfully short legs, which he was severely marked by his surroundings for. This led him to drown his sorrows in alcohol. Thus, Lautrec's otherness was brought upon by his physical weakness and further enhanced by his abuse of alcohol. Here in Lautrec's painting, At the Moulin Rouge, he epitomizes his place as an observer and the society in which he resided. The scene is set in a Parisian cabaret, where he has subtly placed himself in the background, surrounded by joyful people, dancing and conversing. He captures the unsteady excitement of a late night at the Moulin Rouge, where the emphasis is on the groups of people around him, and not himself. Despite being part of the Parisian world as a talented painter, he was never fully considered an insider due to his shortcomings and physical weaknesses. Here we can see paintings by Frida Kahlo. She was part of the Surrealist movement in Mexico. She herself suffered a great deal throughout her life, resulting from a traffic accident, polio, and several abortions. Although she was considered a beautiful woman and was by no means excluded from society as an outsider, she lived most of her life in isolation. This was a distinct choice made by Kahlo herself as a response to her misfortunes and pain. The suffering portrayed in most of her paintings is especially evident in the wounded deer. The deer symbolizes the right foot, and in this she was alluding to her injured right side, the foot of which had been crushed in a bus accident, and the right leg being fractured in 11 different places. 1 year before her death, her right leg was amputated up to her right knee due to complications from gangrene. These symbols of wounds and animals, a common theme throughout her career, are reactions to her environment and the expectations they put on her. By cloistering her true self in the paint, she conveys herself to the world, yet not fully exposed. Her use of symbols and animals are used as a medium to portray her otherness, where the suffering is what sets her aside from society. Kahlo's paintings are important in that her transparency as a woman, a minority, and a member of the human race is both shocking and wonderful, and her art is unlikely to disappear from the memory of the world anytime soon.
Keith Allen Haring was a New York City pop art icon, an artist and social activist inspired by the city's graffiti art scene in the late 1970s. His work was highly political and ranged in theories and concepts of war, sexuality, life, and death. His bold, radiant pop art was displayed in subways before it received international attention for his provocative depictions of the raging social issues of his time. Haring was an out gay man diagnosed with AIDS in 1988, a period in which the disease was at its peak of social stigma. Rather than distance himself from his activist work due to the ignorance and negative attention surely to come, he continued to support his community, even starting his own foundation for AIDS research and awareness. During the last years of his life, Haring's work reflected strong imagery of sexuality, particularly acts deemed lewd and inappropriate for public display, and homosexuality, and how both played out through the oppression of children and gay men. His silkscreen edition, The Blueprint Drawings, completed in 1990, 2 years after his diagnosis, depicts positions of strength, sexual vigor, solitude, confusion, and emotional drowning. The small black and white images telling individual stories are juxtaposed against one another in no particular order to allow the viewer room to create his or her own narrative and relate subjectively to Haring's message of social and political awareness. Haring's efforts to intrigue his viewers through artistic boldness and create open spaces for dialogue are linked to his inherent love for society's others and his own struggle for acceptance, respect, and freedom for all in a civilized society.
The snow it melts the soonest when the winds begin to sing. The corn it ripens fastest as the frosts are setting in. And when a young man tells me that my face he'll soon forget, before we part I'll tell him now, he'll be sure to follow it yet. And the snow it melts the soonest when the winds begin to sing. The swallow skims without a thought as long as it is spring. But when spring goes and winter blows, my love, and you'll be fain for all your pride to follow me where it crossed the stormy main. And the snow it melts the soonest when the winds begin to sing. The bee that flew when summer shone in winter cannot sting, and seen a young man's anger melt between the night and morn. and it's surely not a harder thing than to tame a young man's scorn. So never say farewell to me, no farewell I'll receive, for you will set me to the stile and kiss and take your leave. And I'll stay here till the woodcock calls and the martin takes his wing, for the snow it melts the soonest when the winds begin to sing.